I got a question on my last video and I'm going to answer it in this video. And the question is, when we die and are separated from our body, will our spirit, our highest form as I think you call it, be able to see, hear, feel, smell and taste? A bizarre question, but it's been bothering me. This is the kind of subject I would usually talk about on my Patreon account because this necessarily goes quite deep into spirituality itself. And I think that a lot of people would just naturally assume, especially if they're materialists, that to answer such a question, you necessarily have to go on some kind of flight of fancy. You necessarily, at the very least, have to do a whole load of speculating. And the reason they will think that is because when it comes to sight, sound, touch, smell and taste, those things are obviously inextricably linked with the five physical senses. And therefore, in many people's minds, to speak of experiencing comparable things beyond the five physical senses is just nonsensical inherently. But actually, there are many experiences you can point to that actually indicate there's more going on than one would suppose. For example, if you think of a foodstuff that you really enjoy and that you've eaten quite a lot in the past, if you just imagine eating it, you can evoke the taste very well within your mind. Now, obviously, that's not going to trigger your taste buds. You're not going to physically taste it, but you know what the taste is in your mind. You can experience it within your mind to a degree, and that's just from pure memory. But I think an even better example of how it is possible to experience such things beyond the physical senses, the best example comes in the form of dreams. If in a dream you have a delicious steak pie, you'll be able to smell that steak pie in the dream, and you'll be able to eat and enjoy that steak pie in the dream. But of course, in the waking world, no one is physically standing there while you sleep, holding a steak pie under your nose or feeding a steak pie to you in order for you to experience those things in the dream. You just experience them in the dream, and usually those experiences are far more powerful than they would be in the waking world. And a far better and surely more common example than that is having sex with someone in a dream. Now, when you have sex with someone in a dream, it's a very complete experience. There's no sense in the dream that that sex is lacking in any way. Now, when you wake up, you're probably going to be frustrated, but the reason you're frustrated is one, because the dream ended, and two, because the person you were dreaming of having sex with almost certainly isn't with you, because you're rarely going to dream about having sex with someone that you routinely have sex with in the real world. Usually it's going to be someone that's an unobtainable object of your desire. And so sex in the dream world is not only perfectly sufficient in itself, it is often a kind of hyper form of sex that is unreachable physically because of physical limitations. Whereas in a dream, you don't have the limitations of the physical world, and so everything in a dream can be far more extreme and far more enjoyable. So those are just some examples of how actually, if you think about it, you very commonly experience such things apart from your physical senses. And what this gets onto is the larger truth that you can experience things beyond the physical senses, and not only can you experience things beyond the physical senses, but the higher the level of reality you experience them on, the more intense they're going to be, and the more differently you're going to experience them. So this is where we get on to the model or illustration that really helps to explain why this is. It's called emanation, and I believe it originated with the Pythagoreans, but it was massively elaborated on by Plato and is most famously associated with the Gnostics. Now, it must be remembered that whenever we're using illustrations and models to convey an idea, they are just illustrations and models, and they must not be mistaken for the reality itself. They are just a tool to more easily convey certain ideas. So the basic gist of emanation theory, if you will, is that you have an original source, usually called the monad, the one, but most would call it God. And from here on out, I'm going to explain emanation according to my own model, according to my own illustration that I laid out in my book. One of the missions I had when I wrote my book was to keep things as simple as possible, and I always tried to walk that balance between making the explanation simple while still making it sufficient, making sure that it wasn't going to leave anyone asking any questions. So you have this source, what I would call God. God is spirit, so you can call it God or spirit. And as this questioner observed, that is indeed what we fundamentally are. But this God or spirit is non-phenomenal in that it can't be experienced. And the fact that we are that is the reason it can't be experienced. We can't experience ourselves in that way. And so for this perfect unity to experience anything, there has to be something other than itself, which there can't be in itself because it is perfectly unified, being God, being spirit, being the one, being the monad. Therefore, for there to be any kind of creation at all, for there to be any kind of duality and therefore experience, therefore a phenomenal experience at all, what this one, this monad, this God, this spirit has to do is emanate, which means to kind of project itself out. But it has to do so and introduce a degree of deficiency as it does so, because it's only that deficiency that enables any kind of creation, any kind of duality, because again, the fullness of the one is too unified, too perfect to allow for that kind of duality. So this one emanates and it introduces a degree of deficiency. And in my particular worldview, you have three different emanations fundamentally. The first one is the ethereal or the astral emanation. Then you have the psychic or the mental emanation. And then you have the physical or the material emanation. Now, what's important to recognize is that with each emanation, greater and greater degrees of deficiency are being introduced. And therefore, the further away from the source, the further away from God or the spirit that God emanates, the more crude and dark and corrupt and deficient that level of reality is. That's why here in the world, we experience a lot of suffering, we experience a lot of pain, a lot of sorrow, because we live in the most deficient realm that is possible. Now, I'll go through these realms one by one. So we're all aware of the physical realm. We are all in the physical realm right now. That's our mundane reality, essentially. But while we traverse the material realm in our day-to-day lives, we also operate in the mental realm. But really, when we're wandering around in the world, we're kind of accessing the mental realm. We're not really in the mental realm experientially in that way. When we go to sleep and we have a dream, that is when we are truly in the mental realm experientially. So I don't think I need to go into much explanation of the physical and the mental realms. You all experience them very often, but it is important to point out, and again, it's good to tie this down to common experience, that your experiences of things in the physical realm and the mental realm, they may be the same, but they are experienced differently. So again, if you eat a steak pie in the physical realm, you're using your five senses, your taste buds are being activated, and so forth, and you're eating that steak pie for sustenance. If you eat a steak pie in a dream, it's just a pure experience of itself. You don't need it for sustenance. And of course, your physical senses aren't being employed to enjoy that pie. You're enjoying it psychically, if you like. Now, if we go a level higher than the mind into what I call the ethereal realm, but others will call the astral realm, this is the realm of the afterlife. This is the realm of innumerable heavens, innumerable hells. If you believe in ghosts or phantoms, this is their realm. If you believe in astral projection, then it's the ethereal realm that you'll walk during astral projection. Now, the way we experience things in the astral realm is even more subtle than the way that we experience things in the mental realm. Because whereas in the mental realm, again, we're kind of psychically experiencing whatever it is that we're imagining, in the ethereal realm, we're experiencing things in the deepest aspect of our separate being, if you will. And so knowledge, for example, if you want to absorb knowledge intellectually, you have to imbibe it and you have to kind of mull it over. But when you absorb knowledge in your ethereal form, therefore in the ethereal realm, it's what is described as divine insight or gnosis. You don't have to painstakingly absorb it in the way that you do intellectual knowledge. It's an instant knowing in the depths of your being. And I say in the depths of your being, despite the fact that God or spirit, that we truly are, is higher, because again, that highest form is non-phenomenal. We're not absorbing anything up there. So when I refer to the ethereal realm as the highest level of experience, it's not the highest level of reality, but it's the highest level of reality in which there can be experience, in which there is that kind of phenomenal substance, if you will. And so those are the three realms below God, below spirit, that we routinely experience. And yes, what you can do in the physical realm, what you can experience in the physical realm, can also be experienced in both the psychic realm and the astral realm, but they are going to be experienced differently because you're taking in that experience in a different way. In the physical realm, you're obviously using your five senses to take in experience. In the mental realm, you're using your psychic abilities, if you like, to experience what it is, whatever it is that you're experiencing. But in the ethereal realm, it's a direct experience. It's the deepest form of experience. And so as you go higher in these realms, the more subtle the experience, but it's almost like a paradox, but not quite. Even though the experience is more subtle, because the realms we're talking about are more subtle, the closer you get to God, actually, the more powerful you'll experience any given thing. That's why sex in a dream can so often be better than sex in the physical world, because again, it's idealized, and whatever you experience in a dream is never inhibited by the boundaries of the physical world, unless that is also part of the dream, and that's a factor for your own mind to decide. See, this is a subject I could make a long series about. And so when it comes to our physical experience and the mind, we all understand that if someone explains these things, we can all think, oh yeah, that I see how that makes sense. But obviously, when it comes to the ethereal or the astral realm, that's a matter of experiential spirituality. You have to have an active spirituality to be able to confirm that truth. And I've confirmed it in my own life multiple times. I've experienced ethereal experiences, if you will, multiple times, both internally and in terms of what I've experienced in the outside world, all kinds of supernatural phenomenon. If you're not going to engage in experiential spirituality to be able to verify these truths yourself, especially as they pertain to the ethereal or the astral realm, then the next best thing you can do is heed the testimony of others concerning the ethereal realm. And I'm not just talking about the sacred texts of the world, though those too, but let's have a look at the testimonies that come to us in the form of near-death experiences. There are certain elements that are very much in common in near-death experiences. People will describe being out of their body and in some strange place, and this place, for example, might have flowers, and they'll say that, you know, those flowers I saw in this mysterious place, they were so much more, you know, it's not enough to describe them as beautiful, because the word beautiful just can't express just how truly beautiful those flowers were. Or if they experience love, then they'll say, you know, the word love is just insufficient to describe what I experienced there, but it's the best word we have. And the converse is also true. If an individual has a negative near-death experience, you know, the fear and the terror that they experience is far more intense than any kind of fear or terror they could possibly experience here in the physical world, or even evoke within their own minds. And the reason for such testimonies is precisely what I just explained, is that the closer you get to the source, the higher the realm you're in, yes, the more subtle that realm is in terms of its tangible substance, if you can even use that term, which in fact you probably can't. The more subtle that realm is, but the more intense the experience. And so that's why that illustration of emanation is so powerful, in order to explain how these things can be. So to answer the question, you can say that indeed you can see, hear, feel, smell, and taste beyond the physical body. But because those words themselves are associated with the five physical senses, you probably wouldn't use those words and attach them to the experiences in the mind, certainly not your experiences in the ethereal realm. But what I can tell you from my own experience, and anyone who's experienced similar things would also testify, there's no doubt in my mind that they would testify of this because it's just part of the nature of reality, is that were you to experience, say, something like, let's go back to that example of the flowers. If you're someone who has an appreciation for flowers here in the physical world, you just love looking at flowers, you love smelling flowers. If you were to experience flowers in the ethereal realm, then you would have no need or desire whatsoever to return to the world and experience flowers here, because the experience here in the world is such a degenerated, deficient experience compared to what you can experience in those higher realms that it would just be foolish to want to pick the lesser experience. And there is a very specific explanation for this in emanation theory, and this again is why these kind of videos should be really for my Patreon account, because most people just really aren't interested in going this deep on any subject, never mind this. But in Plato's explanation of emanation theory, for example, what you have are forms. And forms are essentially the essences of different things. So if you have a cat here in the world, what you have in the higher realms, if you will, is like the essence of catness. This is what a cat is. It's the pure essence of cat. And so the cat here in the real world, in the physical world, it basically emanates, if you will, or stems from that form of catness, as Plato would call it. So you have all these different forms in the higher realms, and they all commingle and co-mix to produce different things here in the material realm. But the important point is that whatever is produced here in the material realm, it's almost like an imitation of the true thing that exists in these forms. Now, I think my way of explaining that is just far simpler. But what you can do, and here again I'm probably going too far in my explanation, what you can do, a good way to access these higher forms, is to simply focus or meditate on a particular thing. So I mentioned flowers earlier. Let's say you are someone that's interested in flowers. And I don't know much about flowers myself, but let's say you're someone that is interested in flowers. If you go out and you focus on a flower intensely, if you meditate upon a flower, as it were, if you do that intensely enough, you can experience a higher manifestation, what I would call an ethereal manifestation of that flower. Suddenly, the kind of mundane beauty of that flower can flourish, and you're overcome with the amazing beauty of this flower in a way you've never been before. And this kind of thing used to be well understood, even if not through the theory of emanation. For example, the whole logic. People have often asked, why did the Catholic Church throughout history, why did they spend so much money building these gigantic cathedrals and so forth? Was it just pure vanity? Was it just because that's how important they held their religion to be? Well, maybe in some cases that was their only motive, but the best of them understood, the best of those architects, the best of those designers understood that, well, what they were really trying to do was what you might describe as replicate heaven here on the earth. They were trying to build places of such intense beauty and of such intense sanctity and intense holiness that to go into those places and to spend time in those places would fundamentally change you and quite possibly bring about some kind of transformative experience. That's what they were trying to do, and very successful. I mean, even in the modern day, you'll hear how people go into cathedrals or various other sacred sites or particularly beautiful places and they have some kind of transcendent experience. It's because by attempting to replicate the heavenly, if you will, here in the world, you make it more easy for souls here in the world to experientially follow that line back to the higher realms where these things truly originate, as per Plato's description with his forms and so forth. And by the way, the later Gnostics would call those forms aeons, and they were very personified in the Gnostic system. Now, how literally those Gnostic took those personifications. Yeah, it depends on the Gnostic group, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure myself, but yeah, I've definitely gone way too far in answering this question. But yeah, that's my answer. If that wasn't sufficient, if there's any complexities in there, then you can let me know, and I can go over it again or in a different way at another point in the future. So this is Tuesday. Don't produce any content tomorrow. On Thursday, it will be a Patreon video day, and I'll be continuing to go through the Gospel of Thomas. I'll be covering chapter 5 on Thursday, and chapter 5, as I said last week, is when things really start getting dramatic in the Gospel of John, because that's where Jesus has his first real conflict with the Pharisees. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.